unfold.
Imagine walking through a cathedral of ancient trees. Everything feels silent, stoic, and, well, fiercely individualistic for centuries, and I mean for centuries. This visual impression, it completely dominated our scientific thinking about the forest. It was seen as a gladiatorial arena,
Right.
a relentless, ruthless Darwinian competition where every single tree fought bitterly, root for just a fleeting sunfleck, a pocket of moisture, a single gram of nitrogen.
And that view of the forest, framed as just a collection of autonomous, isolated individuals, all locked in this brutal, zero-sum competition for every resource that wasn't just some convenient metaphor.
No.
It was the prevailing dogma of Western science. It was the lens derived from this really hardened, specific interpretation of Darwinian evolution that we use to manage these massive, complex ecosystems for generations.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what we've learned in just the last few decades, thanks to some really pioneering research, it completely shatters that solitary, competitive image.
It really does.
The perception of isolation, that stoic silence, it turns out to be a profound illusion. We are diving deep today into the invisible subterranean reality known globally as the Wood Wide Web.
Our mission today is to explore how this vast, hidden biological internet, and it's composed not of copper and fiber but of living fungal threads, proves that the forest is not some disorganized collection of competitors,
You're right.
but actually a single, highly coordinated, communicative superorganism. I mean, this discovery, it represents a genuine paradigm shift. It fundamentally changes our understanding of biology and ecology, moving us away from survival of the fittest.
To something more like survival of the most connected.
Exactly. It's a much more accurate biological mandate.
And the foundation of this deep dive, the sources that absolutely blew the lid off this old competitive model, it rests largely on the pioneering work of a forester named Suzanne Simard. She brought a completely new perspective and used some groundbreaking science, specifically radioactive and stable isotope tracing, to provide the empirical proof, the physical reality of this hidden fungal network operating right beneath our feet. We really need to start with that isolationist dogma, because it's impossible to appreciate the revolution of the Wood Wide Web without first understanding just how profoundly industrial and reductive our view of nature had become.
That's crucial context. The prevailing view throughout the 20th century, it treated trees less like living organisms with complex social lives and more like, like autonomous mathematical timber crops.
Just a product.
Just a product designed purely for commercial yield. The scientific foundation was rigid, maximize resource allocation to your selected crop, and minimize everything else.
And this wasn't just abstract theory sitting in university papers.
Oh, no.
This drove massive real-world industrial practices across North America and Europe. So what did this isolationist dogma look like on the ground? What were the practical consequences?
It influenced everything from, the design of logging machinery to what was taught in silviculture curricula. This brutal, simplified logic dictated the clear-cutting of vast swaths of land.
Okay.
If you saw the forest as a collection of competing assets, the entire goal of management was to remove anything that might steal resources, sunlight, water, nutrients, from your single most valuable commodity crop.
Like a Douglas fir.
Like a fast-growing, marketable Douglas fir, exactly.
Because we saw practices like aerial spraying of chemical herbicides, which became a standard and accepted procedure, specifically designed to kill what were explicitly labeled as competitor species.
Yes.
Which species were they targeting with this kind of chemical warfare?
They often targeted native, pioneering, deciduous species like paper birch and aspen. The goal was purely economic, to release the commercially valuable Douglas firs from that competition.
And the logic was simple.
The rationale was incredibly simple. Remove the neighboring, faster-growing hardwoods, and the crop tree is liberated. It will thrive bigger and faster. They planted the firs in these neat, segregated rows, assuming that this brutal industrial logic held true.
But here's where Simard, working in the field in British Columbia, hit this unexplained anomaly that started to crack the entire foundation of this competitive model.
Right. In the early 1990s, Simard observed a profound paradox in these recently managed plantations. In areas where native paper birch had been aggressively removed, where theoretically the Douglas firs should have been liberated and just booming with all the extra resources,
They've been doing great.
they often sickened instead. They turned a sickly yellow, their growth stunted dramatically, and they started succumbing to pathogens like armillaria root disease at alarming, unsustainable rates.
Wow.
So the removal of the supposed competitor didn't strengthen the stand, it crippled it.
That must have been utterly confusing for forest managers who were just following the prescribed scientific methods. The tree they removed wasn't a resource thief. Its absence created a catastrophic weakness.
It flew directly in the face of prevailing wisdom. And Simard's intuition, which, fascinatingly, was partly rooted in her family history. They were horse loggers who had long practiced selective, respectful harvesting rather than clear-cutting.
So a different perspective.
A completely different perspective.
Yeah.
It suggested the direct opposite of the dogma. She hypothesized that the birch was not a villain but a nursemaid. She believed the trees were fundamentally connected, forming some kind of physical subterranean linkage that allowed them to support one another rather than merely fight.
So if the answer wasn't observable in the visible trunk or the canopy, they had to move their focus entirely. Where did they have to look to find proof of this connection?
They had to shift focus entirely beyond the macroforest to the invisible microscopic world of the rhizosphere.
The rhizosphere.
That's the biologically active zone immediately surrounding the roots, maybe only a few millimeters thick, where the truly complex chemical and biological interactions happen. This dense, hyperactive layer of soil was the only place they could conceivably find proof of this purported communication and resource exchange.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the science needed a sophisticated breakthrough to prove this hypothesis.
Yeah.
You can't just dig up the roots and see sugar flowing between a birch and a fir. You need to see the invisible movement of energy.
Exactly. The scientific requirement was a methodology that could trace the movement of carbon, the primary energy source created by photosynthesis, between different tree species in real time and, within a complex, chaotic natural field setting.
Not in a lab.
Right. Observing movement in a petri dish or a lab pot was one thing. Proving it in the dense forest was another entirely.
And the tools they used were radioactive isotopes and stable isotopes. Can you elaborate on the difference and how they function together as these invisible tracking beacons in the atmosphere and soil?
So you needed two distinct signatures to track a two-way flow. For one-way tracking, they used carbon-14.
Okay, 14.
Right, 14 demos. This is a slightly radioactive carbon isotope that acts as a clear, unmistakable beacon, a tracer that you could reliably pick up with a simple Geiger counter.
Simple enough.
But to prove the flow was bidirectional, they also used carbon-13, or 13-Cl. This is a stable, non-radioactive, but heavy isotope that can be detected and measured with extreme precision using mass spectrometers.
So by using both?
By labeling the atmosphere around one tree, say the birch, with 14Cl, and the neighboring tree, the fir, with 13Cl, they could observe exactly where that unique signature carbon ended up in the tissues of the partner tree.
And what was the pivotal moment? The result published in Nature in 1997, that changed everything.
The results were nothing short of revolutionary. They provided the first robust empirical evidence that carbon was not locked strictly within the individual tree that photosynthesized it. Instead, it flowed dynamically and significantly between species, traversing the soil through fungal conduits. That was the scientific confirmation that the forest was wired for wisdom.
And the media, of course, jumped on it.
The media quickly dubbed it the Wood Wide Web, borrowing terminology from the internet that was just becoming commonplace at the time.
What's fascinating here is this collision of the ultramodern and the ancient. You have modern Western science relying on high-tech isotopes and mass spectrometry, and it essentially provided a detailed, mechanistic explanation for what some indigenous cultures have known intuitively for millennia.
If you connect this to the bigger picture, it is a powerful validation of ancient wisdom. This philosophical leap, the idea that the forest is a superorganism or an integrated community, it resonates deeply with indigenous knowledge systems.
Specifically where?
Particularly those of the Coast Salish and Secwepemc peoples of Western Canada, where Simard conducted her early work. These cultures have languages, laws, and practices rooted in the understanding that nature is interconnected and sentient.
So, while industrial foresters were busy clear-cutting under the banner of survival of the fittest, these cultures were practicing stewardship based on the deep-seated idea that everything is one, and that the elders, the mother trees, are crucial custodians of community health.
It just emphasizes the massive blind spot that the hyper-individualistic competitive model created. The fungal network acts as the connective tissue, the neural pathways that integrate the system. The discovery forced us, the Western scientific community, to blur the boundary of the individual tree.
Right.
Resilience, the data showed, comes not from ruthless dominance, but from diversity and integration. The shift is not just scientific. It's profoundly philosophical and ethical.
So let's move down into the actual hardware of this internet. When people hear Wood Wide Web, they often think it's just tree roots twisting together in the dirt.
Right, a common mistake.
But the real infrastructure, the communication cables, are the fungi.
That's a crucial clarification. The connections are facilitated by a symbiotic association called mycorrhiza.
Mycorrhiza.
A term derived directly from the Greek words 𝐏𝐃𝐂𝐂𝐓 for fungus and rhiza for root. The actual body of the fungus, the primary component of this subterranean internet, is what provides the vast reach and efficiency that roots simply cannot achieve on their own.
And this isn't some new evolutionary trick, is it? We are talking about an incredibly ancient partnership.
Immensely ancient. This partnership dates back at least 400 million years to the Devonian period.
400 million.
A time when life was only just beginning to colonize the dry, harsh, nutrient-poor land masses. The scientific consensus is strong. Plants could never have successfully colonized land without the assistance of these fungi. They acted as their original, vastly superior and technologically advanced root systems.
Wow.
It's an association that's actually older than trees themselves.
Okay, so when we talk about a fungus, we're not talking about the portobello mushroom we see on our dinner plate or the cap popping up after rain.
Precisely. That's a common misconception. The mushroom is merely the ephemeral reproductive fruit. It's the equivalent of an apple on a tree designed to spread spores. The actual living body of the fungus, the true communication cables themselves, is the mycelium. It's a vast, branching, three-dimensional network made up of microscopic filaments called hyphae. This is the physical infrastructure of the Wood Wide Web.
And what makes these hyphae such effective infrastructure? Why are they so much better than the tree's own roots when it comes to mining for nutrients?
It's the sheer efficiency of their scale and geometry. Hyphae are incredibly fine, often less than a few micrometers in diameter. We're talking vastly thinner than a human hair.
Okay.
This allows them to penetrate microscopic soil pores and crevices that are chemically and physically inaccessible to the much thicker, coarser tree roots.
And the scale is just...
The scale is staggering. To give you a concrete sense, a single teaspoon of healthy forest soil can contain, conservatively, miles of these fungal threads.
Miles.
This vast network vastly increases the surface area interface for nutrient collection compared to the roots alone, allowing the trees to access nutrients far beyond their physical reach.
So the fungi are building the fiber optic network of the forest. They're literally the high-speed internet service providers of the ecosystem, building the infrastructure that connects the nodes.
Which are the trees?
Which are the trees.
That analogy holds up perfectly. Without the fungal network, the trees are essentially offline, isolated, and limited only to the nutrients they can reach directly with their own roots within a very localized area. The fungi bridge that isolation.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the Wood Wide Web isn't one single global network. It's segmented. It's almost like different regional internets.
Exactly.
Let's unpack the two main types of network architecture, ectomycorrhiza and arbuscular mycorrhiza, because understanding the difference explains who can talk to whom.
This segmentation is vital. The compatibility of the fungal partner dictates membership in the network. We have two primary types that dominate forest ecosystems, and you can distinguish them by how the fungal hyphae interact with the root cell structure.
Let's start with ectomycorrhiza, ECM. The name suggests something outside.
That's your key, ecto, meaning outside. ECM fungi are common in most boreal and temperate woody plants, so think pines, firs, birches, oaks. They form a visible external structure called the mantle. This is a dense, protective sheath of fungal hyphae that encases the root tip, often making the rootlet look distinctively swollen, white, or yellow. You can often scrape this mantle off with a fine instrument.
So that external mantle provides protection. Where does the actual exchange of carbon for nutrients happen?
That happens beneath the mantle in an area called the Harding net. This is where the fungal infrastructure gets really intricate. The hyphae grow inward, weaving meticulously between the epidermal and cortical cells of the root.
Between the cells.
Critically, and this is the vital distinction, they do this without penetrating the actual plant cell walls.
Okay.
The structure they form is complex, like a dense interlocked puzzle, which maximizes the surface area for the chemical exchange of resources between the two partners across that cell membrane interface. Genera like Rhizopogon and Suillus are typical ECM providers.
Fascinating. Now contrast that with the second type, arbuscular mycorrhiza, AM. These are the internal penetrators.
AM fungi are much more cryptic and arguably the most ancient form of this semiosis. They associate with species like maples, cedars, redwoods, and most herbaceous plants.
And they don't have that sheath.
They do not form that visible external mantle. Instead, their hyphae penetrate the physical cell walls of the root cortex.
Wait, they penetrate the structural cell wall. That sounds destructive, almost like an invasion. How is that still a beneficial symbiosis?
It's a remarkable piece of biological engineering. They penetrate the structural cell wall, yes, but they stop just short of breaching the plasma membrane, which is the truly living part of the plant cell. Inside the cell cavity, they form these incredible, highly branched, delicate structures called arbuscules, which literally means little trees.
Little trees inside the cell.
It is these delicate, short-lived, highly branched arbuscule structures that resemble an inverted microscopic tree that provide the huge surface area necessary for nutrient transfer deep inside the plant's own cell. Because they don't form an external mantle, AM networks are invisible to the naked eye and require microscopy to detect.
This technical distinction brings us directly back to Simard's experiment and why the western red cedar was the perfect control.
Precisely. The separation is absolute. A Douglas fir and a paper birch share compatible ECM fungal networks. They are on the same intranet, which facilitates their trade.
They're on the same ISP.
Exactly. But a western red cedar uses an AM fungal partner. It operates on a completely separate, non-compatible network. Therefore, when Simard labeled the fir and the birch, the cedar, despite being physically close, remained offline from that specific exchange, confirming that the fungal type dictates membership in the resource-sharing community.
So we have the hardware, the cables, and the structural connection point. Now, what's the economic currency? What are they trading that makes this expensive partnership worthwhile for both parties?
It's a trade deal founded on two complementary biological limitations. It is the core symbiotic contract that underpins the entire forest economy.
And the tree's contribution is carbon, the currency of sugar.
Yes, the tree is the sophisticated solar power generator. It uses the free energy of sunlight and atmospheric CO2 to create energy-rich sugars, or photosynthase. That is its massive contribution energy.
What?
But the plant is structurally limited in its ability to efficiently access crucial soil nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, which are often locked up deep in mineral rocks or complex organic molecules.
And the fungi provide the high-tech mining and delivery operation.
Correct. Fungi are heterotrophs. They cannot photosynthesize, so they desperately need the tree's carbon. But their mycelial networks are astonishingly effective chemical miners. They secrete potent, customized enzymes, things like phosphatases and various organic acids, which break down recalcitrant organic matter and dissolve minerals.
Unlocking the nutrients.
Unlocking them. This liberates locked, often crystalline nutrients, including nitrogen, phosphorus, copper, zinc, and perhaps most critically, water during dry periods.
And what is the exchange rate in this dynamic biological stock market? You mentioned a staggering figure in our sources.
It is a steep price, but it highlights the immense value of those mined nutrients. The tree delivers a massive amount of its primary energy, up to 30% of its total photosynthesized carbon production, to the fungi in exchange for those mined resources and water.
30%.
30%. Think of it this way. Imagine paying nearly a third of your total annual income just for internet, electricity, and water utilities. That's how essential and critical this fungal partnership is for the tree's survival.
And you noted this is not a fixed contract, it's dynamic. How does the market fluctuate based on supply and demand?
The relationship is constantly being negotiated. Researchers have confirmed that trees act like savvy consumers. If a tree is deeply shaded and producing less sugar, well, the fungus receives less carbon.
Makes sense.
More interestingly, if the soil is suddenly very rich in nitrogen, say, after a small disturbance or a localized event, the tree can afford to pay less carbon for nitrogen delivery. Conversely, if the soil is nutrient poor, the fungus can leverage its monopoly on nutrient access and demand a higher carbon fee. It is a highly sophisticated, fluctuating market governed by the immediate, localized needs of both partners.
It makes you realize that the phrase inert dirt is completely misleading. We are standing on a living, breathing, invisible economy, saturated with fiber optic cables and billions of active transactions happening every second.
After establishing the physical connection and the symbiotic trade, the biggest theoretical challenge remained proving function. Early researchers like David Reed had shown carbon transfer in small, controlled lab plots.
Right.
But skeptics argued vehemently that the complexity, the chaotic flow of resources, and the microbial competition within a real natural forest environment would negate any cooperative effects.
And that's exactly why Simard's landmark 1997 field experiment, conducted in the harsh reality of a British columbial forest, became the defining moment of empirical proof. Let's revisit the sheer rigor of that setup.
It was a methodological masterpiece designed to eliminate all alternative explanations. She selected specific triads of trees: the mature paper birch, a young Douglas fir seedling, and the crucial control, the western red cedar.
The one on the other network.
The one on the incompatible AM network, exactly.
And she needed to ensure the trees were isolated above ground to prove the transfer was happening only beneath the soil, right?
Precisely. They covered each tree with sealed plastic bags, turning them into individual biological chambers. This meant the labeled gas only entered the intended donor tree. There was no possibility of atmospheric mixing or airborne transfer.
Okay, so the tracers.
Then came the tracers.
Oh.
The birch was injected with radioactive 14CO22, the beacon. The Douglas fir was injected with stable, heavy CO22. The cedar, again, received no label.
This rigorous control allowed them to track the sugars the trees subsequently synthesized. What did the Geiger counter reveal after the trees had been photosynthesizing with the labeled gas for a day?
The results were immediate and definitive. When Simard placed the Geiger counter against the Douglas fir, which had been sealed off from the birch's radioactive gas, the device crackled with activity.
Wow!
The 14C carbon had traveled from the birch, down into its roots, through the shared ECM fungal network, and up into the fir's tissues. It was a clear, unambiguous transfer.
And proving the bidirectional flow was the other half of the discovery.
Absolutely. Mass spectrometers confirmed that the stable, heavy 13-CISO from the fir also appeared in the tissues of the birch. This proved that the transfer was not a simple one-way handout. It was fundamentally bidirectional and reciprocal, demonstrating a dynamic shared economy.
And the cedar.
And crucially, the western red cedar control tree remained silent, confirming that the fungal network was the specific physical required conduit for this biological commerce.
So we have the transfer. But what governs who gives and who receives? This takes us into source-sink dynamics, the fundamental rules of the forest's social security system.
Source-sink dynamics describe a gradient of biological need. The tree with an abundance of resources. The source transfers energy to the tree experiencing a critical deficit, the sink. This mechanism is key to maintaining stand resilience.
And the most stunning example, the one that really sells the narrative against the competitive model, is the seasonal swap between the deciduous birch and the evergreen fir.
Yes.
It's driven by their differing life cycles, or phenology.
It's a textbook example of biological collaboration. Consider summer. The paper birch is in full leaf, highly productive, photosynthesizing rapidly, and often casting deep shade on the younger Douglas fir seedlings below.
So it's the source.
The birch has excess carbon. It is the source. During this period, it sends that surplus carbon to the shaded, carbon-starved fir seedlings below, which are the sink. The birch is literally subsidizing the growth of its traditional competitor in a period of highlight.
The nursemaid, just as Simard hypothesized, keeping the fir alive until it can gain sunlight. But that flips entirely, doesn't it?
It flips completely during the shoulder seasons, late fall, early winter, and early spring. The birch is leafless, dormant, and needs energy for root maintenance and preparing for its next leaf flush. It is the sink.
And the fir takes over.
The evergreen Douglas fir, however, retains its needles and can photosynthesize efficiently whenever the ambient temperature allows. The fir now becomes the donor, the source, sending its newly fixed carbon to the needy birch. This support ensures the birch remains healthy, ready to resume its role as the primary summer source and nursemaid.
That seasonal reciprocity is the most powerful empirical counter-argument imaginable to the pure competition model. It shows a deeply cooperative underground economy designed for the resilience of the entire mixed species community, not just the strongest individual.
It's the ultimate expression of interdependence. And this leads to the provocative, though, as we'll discuss, somewhat controversial metaphor of the socialist forest, operating on the principle. From each according to his ability to each according to his needs, ensuring the baseline health of the collective.
When you look at the raw data, what stands out to you about how this social system functions to protect the weakest members?
The survival of shaded seedlings is perhaps the most compelling detail. Simard's follow-up research demonstrated that seedlings growing deep in the shade, where light levels are demonstrably insufficient for them to sustain photosynthesis alone, survive by receiving carbon subsidies.
They're being fed.
They are nursing off the grid, receiving just enough energy to stay viable, metabolically active, and structurally sound until the gap in the canopy opens up and they can make a growth burst toward the light.
And without
this vital tiny subsidy, regeneration of the forest understory would be significantly less diverse and much, much slower.
that means the survival of an entire future generation can hinge on these small, subtle transfers, a margin of survival that the old competitive model entirely missed and deemed impossible.
And then there's the most poignant discovery, the legacy transfer, often called the dying gasp.
The dying gasp.
When an older, large tree, a Douglas fir, a ponderosa pine, or a cedar, is injured or dying, it does not selfishly hoard its remaining carbon reserves.
No.
Instead, studies show it pulses a massive amount of its stored energy into the network, transferring them to neighboring trees, even across species lines. This is a final, profound act of biological altruism. It ensures that the massive amounts of energy accumulated over its lifetime are retained and used by the living community, strengthening the surviving stand rather than being lost slowly to decomposition.
It's the ultimate biological inheritance.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Beyond sharing food, the Wood Wide Web acts as a high-speed subterranean communication highway. As sessile organisms, trees can't simply run from an insect attack or a spreading pathogen. They have to rely on fast, sophisticated chemical warning systems that go beyond just simple resource distribution.
That's the intense evolutionary pressure that necessitates complex communication. When a tree is attacked, it triggers an immediate, localized cascade of biochemical responses. It produces defense enzymes and toxic compounds, like specific terpenoids or tannins, to make its tissues unpalatable or indigestible. But crucially, to protect the whole stand, it must also transmit sophisticated distress signals to its neighbors so they can preemptively raise their own defenses.
We've long known that signaling molecules can travel through the air, the classic air Wi-Fi model. But the crucial finding here proves the existence of an independent, hardwired, underground telephone line.
Yes. The Songal study from 2015 provided the first robust, specific evidence for this underground defense signaling, proving it was clearly separate from the well-established airborne transmission pathway.
So it wasn't just a theory anymore.
Right. This moved the concept from a speculative idea to a verified mechanism.
How is this demonstrated? It sounds incredibly difficult to separate the airborne from the subterranean signals in a real forest.
It required rigorous methodological control. Researchers took Douglas fir seedlings and deliberately defoliated them. That is, they mechanically damaged the leaves to simulate an insect attack.
Okay.
They then monitored neighboring ponderosa pines. The key methodological step was that the pines were connected to the firs by the fungal network, but were physically separated above ground, often cased in mesh and bags, to ensure absolutely no airborne signals, no VOCs, could pass.
And what was the response of the pines? Did the message get through the fungal network?
It was decisive. Upon receiving the signal through the mycelium, the underground conduit, the ponderosa pines began to upregulate their defense genes and produce specific defense enzymes.
So they were arming themselves.
The injured firs were effectively shouting "attack" through the fungal telephone lines, and the pines armed themselves before the insects even arrived on their leaves. This is predictive defense, activated remotely.
Let's break down that biochemical arsenal they were producing preemptively. What specific weapons are we talking about here?
These are complex, resource-intensive molecules. There were several key enzymes they detected being upregulated. First, peroxidase, or POD. This enzyme is crucial for reinforcing cell walls, a process known as lignification. It essentially hardens the plant tissue, making it much more difficult for the chewing insect to mechanically consume.
Fortifying the castle walls before the siege begins?
Exactly. Then there's polyphenol oxidase, or PPO. This enzyme is fascinating because when it's released into the plant tissue, it oxidizes various phenolic compounds into highly reactive molecules called quinones.
And what do those do?
When an insect ingests these quinones, they bind rapidly to proteins in the insect's gut, dramatically reducing the nutritional value and digestibility of the leaves. The tree, through this chemical reaction, effectively turns its edible leaves into something akin to cardboard, starving the herbivore, even if it continues to consume the foliage.
That is truly next-level chemical warfare, aimed not just at deterrence, but at systemic harm to the attacker.
And finally, they detected superoxide dismutase, SOD, an enzyme that helps a plant manage internal oxidative stress within its own cells during the attack. The takeaway is that these responses are highly coordinated, highly specific, and were triggered entirely by a distress signal received from a distant injured neighbor via the underground network.
Now let's compare this to the established air Wi-Fi communication model.
The classic example is the acacia tree and the kudu antelope in the African savanna. When browsed, the acacia rapidly increases internal toxin levels and emits ethylene gas, a volatile organic compound, or VOC.
Right.
Downwind acacias detect that ethylene plume and immediately start producing their own high levels of toxins, often within 5 to 10 minutes. The speed is incredible.
So the advantage of the airborne signal is speed, but what are the inherent limitations?
It is a broadcast signal, entirely subject to wind direction and atmospheric dispersion. It could be fast, but it's not targeted. In contrast, the fungal hardline network is slower. Carbon transfer is detected within 24 hours, defense signaling, the enzyme upregulation, within 6 hours.
But it's reliable.
But it is targeted, independent of weather conditions, and highly persistent. For the scale of tree time, where an insect infestation might take weeks to spread, the speed is entirely sufficient and reliable.
This raises a profound question. Is there anything faster than that biochemical transfer, which relies on chemical diffusion through the hyphae?
There is ongoing frontier science looking into the possibility of electrical signaling action potentials moving rapidly through the plants and the fungal networks themselves.
Like a nervous system.
If confirmed, these electrical impulses would be significantly faster than chemical diffusion, potentially functioning as a primitive nervous system analog within the forest. It truly reinforces the idea that we are dealing with a massive distributed intelligence system that uses multiple overlapping communication channels. So if we accept the Wood Wide Web as the forest's internet, then we have to discuss the network's topology. Network analysis reveals that the forest operates as a scale-free network.
What does that mean?
It means it's much like the human brain, or the internet itself, or an airline hub-and-spoke system. There are thousands of small nodes, but a few highly connected, disproportionately important central hubs.
And these hubs are what we've come to call the mother trees. What defines them scientifically beyond just being the biggest trees?
They are defined by their sheer connectivity and resource capacity. They are typically the oldest, largest, and most resilient trees in the stand. They have the most massive established root systems, the largest canopies, and consequently, the immense photosynthetic capacity to support and sustain a vast, dense network of fungal symbionts.
And how connected are they?
A single mother tree can be connected to hundreds of other trees of various species and ages, acting as the nexus for all major resource flows.
So they are not just passive recipients. They act as the central server and resource reservoir for the entire local community, maintaining the network's health.
Precisely. They stabilize the forest. Their deep taproots can access deep groundwater that smaller, younger trees cannot reach, and they share that crucial water through the network, especially during severe drought years. They are the anchor points, the central server stabilizing the digital network, often keeping dozens of seedlings alive on the margins of survival simply by providing baseline hydration and energy.
Here's where the idea of the forest community moves from simple cooperation to genuine biological sophistication. Kin recognition. Does the mother tree actively favor her own children?
That is one of the most provocative and intensely debated findings in the field. It moves us beyond simple resource exchange into complex social behavior. Simard's research, particularly with Douglas fir, suggests that mother trees do, in fact, allocate more carbon and resources quantifiably to their own offspring, their kin, than they do to genetically unrelated stranger seedlings of the same species growing at the same distance.
So they can tell who's who.
It implies a highly active, sophisticated biological ability to recognize genetic relatedness.
And it goes beyond just resource allocation. They structurally adjust their environment to help their kin establish themselves.
Yes, the structural aid is a key piece of evidence. They observe that mother trees appear to alter their own fine root growth pattern. They actively reduce their competitive root spread in the immediate vicinity of their own seedlings, effectively opening up space and access to water for their kin to establish and thrive.
And for others.
Simultaneously, they maintained or even increased competitive root density against non-kin seedlings. This shifts the mother tree from a passive pump to an active matriarch, making complex strategic decisions aimed at maximizing the propagation of her specific genes.
It sounds like the highest form of localized biological altruism, focused on maximizing genetic legacy and community health simultaneously. However, we have to address the pushback.
Yes.
This concept, having gained widespread public and romantic imagination, has faced significant scientific scrutiny. What are the key criticisms leveled against the Wood Wide Web claims?
This is a vital part of the deep dive, allowing us to achieve that well-informed, balanced perspective. The scientific community, as it should, demands rigorous proof. In 2023, Justine Karst and her colleagues published a highly influential critical perspective that challenged the extent and ecological significance of the most dramatic Wood Wide Web claims.
What were Karst's core arguments against the ubiquity and importance of this functional network?
They focused on three main methodological and systemic issues. First, positive citation bias.
Okay.
Karst argued that the scientific literature is systematically skewed. Positive results showing clear transfer or functional benefits are cited frequently and gain traction, while null results experiments that fail to find a significant effect or correlation are often ignored or remain unpublished.
So we're only hearing the good news.
Essentially, they found that unsupported claims about the functional significance of these underground networks have doubled over the last quarter century, possibly driven by this bias.
So we might be seeing the phenomenon, but we could be massively overstating its importance in the grand scheme of the entire forest's carbon budget.
Exactly. That leads to the second major criticism, scale limitation. They highlight that many of the most dramatic findings, particularly those showing large altruistic resource transfers, come from small-scale greenhouse pot studies or controlled microcosms.
Not the real world.
While these are methodologically sound for proving existence, scaling that functionality up to a vast, chaotic natural forest environment is incredibly difficult, and large-scale network mapping and replication in the field remain sparse. Critics argue that the existence of the physical hyphae does not automatically prove it is functionally moving ecologically significant amounts of resource in the complexity of a natural setting.
And the third point of contention questions the mechanism itself. Could these resources be moving through simple passive means rather than active fungal transport?
That's the alternative pathways critique. It questions whether the labeled carbon is moving strictly through the active fungal hyphae, or if it's simply moving through generalized means, through soil-water diffusion, or perhaps through root exudates sugars leaking passively into the soil matrix that a neighboring root then picks up.
So it's just leakage.
Right. If a dying tree leaks sugar into the soil, is that deliberate, conscious cooperation or just passive biological leakage? The experimental difficulty lies in definitively separating active hyphal transport from simple diffusion in field conditions.
This skepticism leads to the powerful counter-romantic view, the capitalist fungus, proposed by researchers like 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓.
What's fascinating here is the biological market theory championed by 𝐏𝐿𝐃𝐂𝐓. They propose that the fungi are highly specialized, self-interested capitalist traders, not altruists.
The fungus is in it for itself.
The fungus is looking out for itself. It will hoard its mined resources, the nitrogen and phosphorus, and sell them to the highest bidder, the tree that provides the most high-quality sugar. It's a pure economic transaction driven by self-interest and survival, not a communal redistribution of wealth.
So where does this leave the listener? Does the criticism negate the discovery that trees are connected?
Not at all. It requires nuance. Simard and her supporters emphasize that complexity and difficulty in field replication do not negate the strong experimental evidence, especially the bidirectional isotope tracing. The consensus emerging is that the two models, the socialist altruism and the market capitalism, are likely not mutually exclusive. The network can exhibit behaviors of both. Fungus might indeed be a self-interested capitalist trader, but it still benefits itself by keeping the system healthy and resilient. Supporting shaded seedlings or sharing resources with a diverse stand is simply a highly strategic long-term investment, ensuring the fungus cultivates future diverse sugar sources.
So the goal is the same.
The goal of the forest community, like any healthy market, is resilience. The Wood Wide Web is far more than just a biological curiosity. Its confirmed existence demands a radical restructuring of how we interact with the forest, starting immediately with resource management practices.
The science challenges traditional resource extractive silviculture at its core. If connection is key to resilience, what is the most catastrophic consequence of practices like clear-cutting on this invisible network?
Clear-cutting is catastrophic because it instantly breaks the network. It's the equivalent of severing all fiber optic cables and shutting down the central server simultaneously. It removes the mother trees, which are the essential resource hubs and anchors.
And the fungi themselves.
And crucially, the fungal symbionts, the ISPs, require living roots to survive. When you remove all the trees, you essentially starve and kill the fungal diversity, leaving the soil disconnected, inert, and biologically impoverished.
So replanting is harder?
Replanting vulnerable saplings in that dead soil deprives them of the essential fungal infrastructure they need to thrive, making them highly vulnerable to stress and disease.
So the scientifically supported alternative, the logical evolution of forestry, is retention forestry. What does that look like in practice?
Retention forestry is the logical counterpoint. It advocates for leaving mother trees, or specific groups of large legacy trees, standing. These retained trees anchor the network, provide the resource legacy through their immense carbon reserves, and most importantly, they inoculate the regenerating seedlings with the local diverse fungal spores and mycelium.
They jumpstart the new system.
They jumpstart the new forest social system and significantly accelerate the recovery and resilience of the stand. It's about managing for continuity, not just extraction.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the network is also proving to be absolutely vital for resilience in the face of rapid climate change.
Diversity is inherently strength. Connected, diverse forests are significantly more resistant to environmental stresses, whether from localized drought, massive insect attacks like bark beetle infestations, or the introduction of new pests than fragile monoculture plantations.
Right.
The single species, isolated model, driven by the competitive dogma, is proving to be highly vulnerable to systemic collapse.
And the network even facilitates ecological transition, almost providing a safety net as climate conditions shift.
That's the concept of assisted migration playing out biologically. As the climate shifts, some species naturally begin to struggle in their historical range. The wood wide web provides the means for ecological transition. Dying trees of one species may transfer their remaining resources to rising, more adapted species already establishing themselves in the stand, smoothing that process and preventing catastrophic localized collapse.
So the forest helps itself adapt.
The forest uses its social security system to aid its own evolution and adaptation.
So let's bring it all home. We started this deep dive with the forest as a silent, stoic collection of isolated pillars, but we've ended up with a profound conceptual shift in how we view the living world.
The central shift is realizing that the soil is not inert dirt. It is a dense, responsive, interconnected neural network of biological intelligence. We are, quite literally, standing on a brain.
Wow.
When you, the listener, look at a tree now, you should no longer see a solitary timber column. You should see the visible node of a vast, invisible supporting web that spans the entire landscape. It is the visible tip of a massive, shared, resilient biological iceberg.
And as Suzanne Simard herself summarizes this incredible journey of discovery, it offers a powerful lesson in interdependence. Next time you hug a tree, remember, you are not hugging an individual, you are hugging a vast, interconnected community that has survived 400 million years by learning to share. The boundary of the individual is an illusion, and resilience truly comes from connection.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the overwhelming lesson of survival of the most connected raises an important question for us, for the listener, to mull over. We, too, face increasing global challenges: climate instability, resource scarcity, social fracturing. What does this natural, highly optimized biological model imply for our own human societal structures and community building?
Right.
Do we continue to optimize primarily for competition and the ascent of the strongest individual, or do we prioritize and invest heavily in the health, communication, and resilience of our collective network?
The wisdom of the forest might be exactly the insight we need right now.